In the spring of 2004, I came across a book written by the then President of the Ukraine, Mr. Leonid Kuchma. It was entitled "The Ukraine is not Russia." The title astonished me. We Poles are very well aware that the Ukraine is the Ukraine and Russia is Russia. However, as I read the book, ideas came to me and I asked myself, how about investigating the history of the Ukrainian nation? What if I made a film about its formation? I turned to some respected historians for help and cooperation and plunged into further reading. The result was a breathtaking journey through the centuries. It stands to reason that every traveler brings back their own impressions of their journey. I am going to share mine with you. On the 24th of August 1991, the independence of the Ukraine was declared by the Ukrainian parliament, the Verkhovna Rada. Overnight, in the geographical center of Europe, a new sovereign state appeared with a territory equal to that of Great Britain and Germany combined, and a population of over 50 million. A referendum was held on the 1st of December 1991. Over 90% of the voters supported Ukrainian independence. We arrived in Ukraine on the eve of the 13th anniversary of Independence Day. I wondered whether the response to the first referendum would have been as unanimous and unequivocal had it been held now. We made a start in Kiev. If the referendum on Ukraine's independence were held today, what would your answer be? The event which took place 13 years ago belongs to one of the most significant, because Ukraine had always been so terribly oppressed, and particularly after the Pereyaslav Treaty of 1654, when Bogdan Khmelnytsky signed the agreement with Russia. I think that was the gravest mistake in our history. I would vote against, because according to older people, the life under the Soviet Union was better. Only for independence. Just like then, I'm for. Yes. What is the word USSR on the T-shirt? That's simply such a fashion. I am against the independence of Ukraine. Socialism would have been better. I lived better under the Soviet Union because I got a salary, while now I only get a pension. And still, you know, it is easier to breathe, so to speak. I would have voted for the union with Russia, with Belarus. Because I'm a confirmed cosmopolitan, and by my original self-identification, I belong to the Russian culture. I am proud in my 80 years of age to have lived up to the time when my own Ukraine is independent. For independent Ukraine, look at what's going on in the streets. Just think how wonderful it feels to be a Ukrainian. I am positive that there cannot be another vote. Ukraine is ours. Kharkiv. Dependent or independent? You know, I did not see anything bad in our living altogether. Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, they are actually one nation, that is to say. We're not interested in Europe, or say Germany, or whatever. We lived in the Soviet Union. If there is a chance of getting free from slavery, one should snatch at it. For the independence of Ukraine, for independence. I think we have to support independence all possible ways. I can't answer this question. I just can't. Actually, I'm all confused. Lviv. Of course, I'd vote for the independence. Unequivocally, for independence. 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 I don't recognize this word, and I don't know the state called Ukraine. I'm an old nationalist, so I'm only for Ukraine, for the European choice. Yes, all Western countries did that, to get further from Asia, closer to Europe. Odessa. Without doubt, for the independence of Ukraine. Independence is but a word, there is no real essence about it. Today we have a name, the independence of a sovereign state, which became independent in 1991, and so on and so forth. But generally speaking, we haven't achieved everything we would like to have. I would vote for independence, not from Russia, but from the government we have at present. As long as we have the leadership of today with the thieves all over, in the Verkhovna Rada and in the President's circle, we shall have the situation even worse than it is now. None of us could predict the events that were to take place soon after. From Rus to Ukraine. The steppe and the rivers of the Ukraine have determined the development of this country since time immemorial. 5,000 years ago, early civilizations tilled the soil and raised cattle here. This civilization was later named the Tripilia culture. In the middle of the second millennium BC, they were absorbed by the North Iranian tribes of the Cimmerians who came to this area. They were followed by the Scythians, who established their empire here. Proof of the sophistication of their culture can be found in the rich and sophisticated artifacts which have been discovered in archaeological excavations. Then the Sarmatians came, then hordes of Huns and Goths, followed by other nomads, passed through the area. The first Slavs settled on this land about 3,000 years ago. The Dnieper is a sacred river for the Ukraine. The ancient Greeks called it the Borisvinis. The Dnieper formed a large part of the Viking route, which ran from Scandinavia to Byzantium, the center of civilization of the time. The Vikings were not merely plunderers, they were also merchants. Kiev, founded around the 5th century AD, was favorably located right on the trading route to Byzantium. In the middle of the 11th century, the Vikings captured Kiev. Gradually, they mixed with the local Slavic population and adopted their language and customs. As a result of their trading activities, the name Rus appeared on the pages of Arabic and Byzantine chronicles. The first prince of Kiev was Oleg of the Rurik clan. Oleg and his descendants had to wage unending wars with the nomadic tribes of the steppes. But their biggest enemy, however, was Byzantium, a source of culture and various riches for medieval Europe. From the beginning of the 10th century, for about 150 years, all the princes of Rus would wage military campaigns against Byzantium, though with mixed success. In opposing Byzantium, they would inevitably face Christianity, which had already begun penetrating into Rus. Princess Olga adopted Christianity and was baptized, but under her militant son, Sviatoslav, a revival of paganism occurred. Christians regarded pagans as sinful barbarians, so in order to marry into a European royal family, one had to be a Christian. Olga's grandson, Vladimir, was well aware of this fact. When the Emperor of Byzantium asked him for military support, Vladimir placed a condition. He was to marry the Emperor's sister. Vladimir was baptized in the old Greek colony of Chersonis in the Crimea in 988. In this fashion, he not only became a Christian monarch, but also became part of the family of the Byzantine emperor. Little could people foresee at that time that the church would be split before long, which would lead to a divided Europe. Vladimir returned to Kiev, where he built many churches and strengthened and reinforced the state borders. He is known in history as Vladimir the Great. After his death, Vladimir's sons were involved in a ferocious struggle for the throne. Two of them, Boris and Hlib, were treacherously murdered, later to be proclaimed the first holy martyrs of Rus. While the portraits of other rulers of Rus are works of artistic imagination, the actual appearance of Prince Yaroslav is more certain following a meticulous examination of his skull. The prince was buried in the church he himself had built. St. Sophia's Cathedral has remained unchanged following its reconstruction in the 17th century. The famous Cathedral of St. Sophia in Constantinople served as a model for this cathedral. St. Sophia's Cathedral became the venue for the coronation of all the princes of Rus. Greek books were translated here into the Slavic language. Christianity brought to Rus the art of reading, which distinguished the new Christians from their pagan ancestors. Prince Yaroslav was otherwise known as the father-in-law of Europe, because one of his daughters, Elizabeth, married the King of Norway and Denmark. Another was the Queen of Hungary, and his daughter Anna became the Queen of France. Prince Yaroslav's The Truth of Rus was the first written code of law in the country and remained in force till the end of the 15th century. Ever active, Yaroslav continued to develop Kiev. As Tetmar the chronicler wrote, Kiev is populated by an incredible number of people. It has more than 400 churches and 8 markets. For Yaroslav, it was important for the capital city to be worthy of the Christian sovereign of a mighty state. He was given a second nickname by his descendants, Yaroslav the Wise. At the end of Yaroslav's reign, Kievan Rus spread from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea, from the river Oka to the Carpathian Mountains. Yaroslav secured the border between Rus and Poland by marrying off his sister to Kazimierz the Restorer. He also augmented the prestige of his dynasty by marrying off his son to the daughter of the Byzantine Emperor Constantine Monomach. Their son Vladimir Monomach was the last prominent sovereign of Rus, and his hat became the coronation crown of all the Russian Tsars. In 1054, on his deathbed, Yaroslav divided up his state, bequeathing territories to each of his sons. A decision that resulted in much internecine strife and loss of territory. Other problems for the future began to be apparent at this time. One chronicler noted that somewhere up in the north, far away from Kiev, among wild forests and marshes, Yuri Dolgoruki, the youngest son of Vladimir Monomach, founded the small town of Moscow. The Princess Fratricidal Wars spanned over 100 years, but the greatest plague for Rus was not war, but a new dangerous enemy looming in the steppe, the Mongols. In 1223, in the battle at the Kalka River, the joint forces of all the Rus princes were defeated. The enemy seemed to appear from nowhere and then vanish into thin air. 14 years later, the Mongols returned, with Genghis Khan's grandson, Khan Bati, at their head. The affluent cities of Rus were plundered and destroyed. Never again did they regain their former splendor. In 1240, after a long and heroic defense, Kiev surrendered. The rich and magnificent city, inhabited by over 50,000 people, was turned into a miserable hamlet with no more than 200 poor, ramshackle huts left. The Mongols dashed on into Poland, Hungary and Austria. Panic-stricken people ran for their lives from the infernal demons of Tartarus, hence the name Tartars. Rus fell under the power of the Tatar Mongols, the Golden Horde. Those princes of Rus who managed to escape death had to obtain from the Khan special permission to rule. If they refused to submit, they were killed. Kievan Rus ceased to exist. The fall of Kiev meant the collapse of the symbolic center that had united the state. Although its cultural source had been Byzantium, the political and social structure of Rus had meant it had been incorporated into Europe. The Tatar-Mongol invasion broke the coexistence of Eastern and Western influences upon Rus, and it also hindered its development when compared to other European countries. The so-called Tatar-Mongolian yoke proved to be particularly tenacious in the regions closest to the Golden Horde, namely in the northeast. Moscow happens to have inherited that framework of autocratic ruling. Its isolation from the West was only put to an end in the times of Peter I. In the south, the occupation was shorter, so Western influence was restored much earlier. As for Halych Volodymyr Rus, it never lost contact with the West. The diametrically different fates of different regions of Kievan Rus were instrumental in the later formation of nations. The monuments to Danilo of Halych can be seen in Halych, the capital city of his principality, in Volodymyr Volhynsky, which Danilo annexed, and also in Lviv, which Danilo founded in honor of his son Lev. That part of Rus was relatively less devastated by the Tatar Mongols. Danilo managed to gain the confidence of the Golden Horde and secure more independence. Together with Pope Innocent IV, by whom he was crowned, he made attempts at forming an anti-Mongolian coalition in Europe. Although their attempts failed and the Khan ordered the demolition of all fortifications in the area, Halych Volodymyr Rus still succeeded in maintaining the cultural traditions of Kievan Rus for about 100 years, resulting in a tendency for people in the region to orientate themselves around the West. The first half of the 14th century saw the disintegration of the Golden Horde. The last of the Halych Volyn princes died, and Poland seized most of the lands of the principality. The southern parts of the former territory of Rus, including Kiev, were seized by Lithuania. The Rurik family was supplanted by Lithuanian princes who adopted Christianity, the local language and customs. During this period, Moscow began to annex its neighboring principalities. In 1480, Prince Dmitry Donskoy won a decisive victory over the Horde in the field of Kulikovo. In the next century, Ivan III threw off the Tatar-Mongol yoke and married the daughter of the last emperor of Byzantium. That would later enable the Tsars to construct a myth about Moscow being the Third Rome and the only defender and champion of the Orthodox Church. Today, the Palace of Bakhchisarai is but one of the many tourist attractions in the Crimea. Lines from the Quran decorate the tombstones of the Hire Khans, whose names used to terrify nations. Ambassadors from all over Europe had to stand humbly under this gate, waiting for an audience with the Khan. The Crimean Khanate grew in strength after the breakup of the Golden Horde. The Tatars raided as far as Kiev, Moscow and Warsaw. When the Tatars became Turkey's vassals, the slave markets in Bakhchisarai, Kaffa and Istanbul knew no shortage with women becoming imprisoned in harems. One of them, the beautiful Roxolana, became the favorite wife of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent. Young boys were trained as janissaries, the Sultan's most faithful guard. Having conquered Constantinople, the Ottoman Empire, after the Mongol threat had lessened, turned into a new menace for Europe. The fortresses on the Black Sea coast stand to remind us of the former power and wealth of the sultans. In 1569, Poland and Lithuania formed the Lublin Union, between creating a Rzeczpospolita or republic between the two nations. As a result, all the lands of the Ukraine passed under the jurisdiction of Poland. From that time, the Ukraine began to absorb, through Poland, the ideas of the European Renaissance, which made a great impact upon its economic and intellectual development. Various guilds were formed, and crafts and trade began to develop rapidly. Lviv was marvelously rebuilt after a great fire. In the words of Professor Ihor Shevchenko, Europe came to the Ukraine wearing a Polish jacket. But it is only fair to add that that same Polish jacket also brought to the Ukraine the yoke of serfdom. A reaction to Polonization and the growth of Catholic influence brought about a consolidation and revival of the Orthodox faith. The first Orthodox community was initiated in Lviv, followed by similar communities in Kiev and some other cities. Schools and printing presses began to appear. Community members commenced their polemical battle with Catholicism. Prince Constantine of Austrich was an ardent champion of orthodoxy. He printed the first unabridged text of the Bible in the Old Slavic language. The prince founded an academy in Austrich, in which 7 liberal arts were taught. The defense of orthodoxy required communication with opponents through a mutual language, which is why not only Greek and Old Slavic, but also Latin were taught at the academy. Although the proponents of traditional orthodoxy considered knowledge of the finer point of the Latin language to be conducive to the corruption of the soul, it was through Latin that the Ukraine became acquainted with a comprehensive knowledge of the cultural heritage of Europe of those days. At the same time, the power and influence of the Muscovite state continued to grow. Ivan the Terrible exterminated all the boyar liberties in a most cruel fashion and proclaimed himself Tsar. He drowns in blood the merchant republic in Novgorod, the last stronghold of democracy. This is the view of the Dnieper River opening from the island of Hortytsa. In the 16th century, there were high rocky rapids here. They formed a natural barrier against raids from the upper reaches of the river. Beyond the rapids, Prince Vishnevitsky Baida founded Zaporizhian Sich, a settlement of free Cossacks. No woman was permitted access to the territory of this military republic. When war threatened, or during actual hostilities, discipline was extremely strict. The council elected the Sich's authorities, the chieftain, the clerk, the maintenance chief, the judge and Cossack captains. They were all subordinated to the council and answerable to it, sometimes with their heads. The phenomenon of the Cossacks only came into existence in the border area, where the unpopulated territories of Poland mingled with the lands of the Crimean Khanate. This was known as the famous wild fields, no man's land. As a matter of fact, it is from the word which means borderlands that the Ukrainian historian Ivan Lysak-Rudnitsky derives the name Ukraine. After some time, when the population began to regard the Cossacks as their defenders, both against the Tatar raids and Polish oppression, and when the format of the Cossack government spread to larger territories, the name Ukraine replaced the name Rus. Depending upon the language, the word Cossack meant either a free man, a bodyguard or a robber, or a bandit. Initially, Cossack formations included men from different social groups with different ethnic and religious backgrounds. Their origin did not matter. Only courage and physical strength was important. Serf peasants, the gentry, various adventurers and reckless souls would run away to the border territories in order to escape from any form of authority. The Dnieper was rich in fish, and its reed beds provided an excellent hiding place. From here a direct route led straight to the Black Sea and further on to Turkey. The Cossacks in Chaikas, their swift boats, made for the Turkish shores and came back with rich booty. Baida Vishnevetsky, who died in Istanbul after having been tortured and hooked by his rib, became a part of the Cossack legend. The steppe was neither safe nor secure. Every spring the Tatars raided the wild fields, despite the Cossacks watching the steppe. Cossack regiments took part in all Poland's wars against the Tatars, Moscow, Sweden and Turkey. King Sigismund III initiated the Counter-Reformation in Poland. He was the champion and upholder of one single church, the Catholic Church. In 1596, on the initiative of several Orthodox bishops, the Brest Union was signed. The Uniates acknowledged the superiority of Rome in matters of faith and dogma, but preserved their liturgy, services and rites. Orthodoxy at that time was the basis of the Ukraine. Rus identity. The Union was defied vigorously by the Orthodox majority, and the nation was split. The Uniates excommunicated the Orthodoxians, while the Orthodoxians condemned the Uniates as apostates. Paradoxically, it is the Uniate Church that was destined to preserve the Ukrainian national identity. The verbal war instigated by the Brest Union exceeded the confines of a purely religious conflict and rapidly acquired political and nationalistic features as soon as Hetman Sahadatchny and all the Cossacks swore their allegiance to orthodoxy. At the beginning of the 17th century, the Cossacks presented a well-organized, powerful force capable of playing a decisive role in any battle. When, in 1621, a mighty Turkish Tatar army attacked Poland, Hetman Sahadatchny brought along 40,000 Cossacks to stand by the Poles. Owing to this support, Poles defeated the Turks. The Cossacks were called the most faithful defenders of the motherland. The Ukrainian Orthodoxy incorporated two trends, one Byzantine, the other Western. The two trends were synthesized by Metropolitan Petro Mohyla, who in 1632 founded a collegium based on the Jesuit model. The collegium, later renamed the Mohyla Academy, provided young Orthodoxian with the possibility to receive a good education and resisted in this fashion the avalanche-like process of Polonization and Catholicization. The students of the collegium formed the intellectual elite of Ukraine Rus. During the headmanship of Ivan Mazepa, the Mohyla Academy numbered 2,000 students. At present, the University Kiev Mohyla Academy carries on those glorious traditions. Under Mohyla's guidance, the liturgy was edited. The churches of Old Rus were restored, and statues of local saints were unveiled. Orthodoxy became the nationwide religion. Mohyla's sister, Raina Mohylanka, commissioned the building of many Orthodox churches and monasteries. She would curse everyone who had renounced the faith of their forefathers. But little did she know that her curses would fall upon her own son. Yerema Vishnevetsky converted to Catholicism and became a deadly enemy of the Orthodox Cossacks. Many old Rus families became Polonized. The Sangushkos, Czartoryskis, Patzys, Tyszkiewiczes, Chodkiewiczes, the Potes. The list is endless. Due to the Polonization of the national elite, it was the Cossacks who took over the role performed by the nobility in other countries. The Cossack became the central figure in the national consciousness of the Ukrainians. The raids of the Cossacks triggered Istanbul's violent reaction, and in turn Warsaw resorted to reprisals. The Polish parliament regarded the Cossacks as a mere tool. In wartime, they increased the registered number of the troops, while in the time of peace, they cut it drastically. But a man who had already felt the taste of freedom, who had got used to earning his living by his sword, would resent returning to the role of a serf. Numerous riots and uprisings broke out. All the uprisings were ruthlessly repressed by force until Khmelnytsky appeared in the siege. Bogdan Khmelnytsky was an experienced and skilled leader educated by the Jesuits. He participated in Poland's wars against Turkey and spent 2 years in Turkish captivity. To avoid the bloody outcome of previous uprisings, Khmelnytsky made an agreement with the Khan and received the Tatars' military support. In April 1648, upon learning of the Polish troops' approach, the Cossack Tatar army moved forward to meet them. In 3 successive battles, the Cossacks crushingly defeated the Poles. Poland staggered and Europe was surprised. One British chronicle wrote, "Poland, all in dust and blood, fell down at the Cossacks' feet." Khmelnytsky headed for Lviv, took the ransom and paid the Khan. The news of the Cossacks' victories incited the serf peasantry to rebel. The rebellious peasants massacred their hateful Polish landlords, the uniate clergy and the Jews. Almost 300 Jewish villages were plundered and burned down, with all the inhabitants killed. Prince Vishnevetsky put up forests of stakes and gallows wherever he went. The Ukraine was drowned in blood. Khmelnytsky paid the Tatars with thousands of Ukrainian slaves. Alongside songs praising him, there was one which went like this: "May the first bullet never miss you, Khmelnytsky. May the second bullet hit you right in the heart." Kiev welcomed the victorious hetman just as it used to welcome the princes of Old Rus. Khmelnytsky was referred to as a modern Moses, the liberator of his people. The Metropolitan blessed him in the war against Poland and anointed him as a defender of orthodoxy. The Cossack state that was created as the result of those victories was later named the Hetmanhood. It lasted till the end of the 18th century. Despite the gradual decrease of its autonomy, the very fact of its existence laid the foundation for future aspirations of an independent sovereign state and helped focus thoughts of national identity. To the Polish ambassadors, Khmelnytsky said, "I will liberate all the people of Rus from Polish serfdom. I will forever be fighting for our Orthodox faith." The flames of war blazed up anew. The joint Cossack-Turkish forces besieged the Poles in the fortress of Sparasz. King Jan Kazimierz, who had hurried to help the besieged, was detained by the Cossacks. Only the betrayal of the Khan, bribed by the Poles, forced Khmelnytsky to sign a peace treaty. As for the Tatars, they brought out of the Ukraine so rich a booty and so many captives that a man could be bought at the slave markets for just a handful of tobacco. In late June, early July 1651, a decisive battle took place, a battle between Polish troops headed by the Polish king and the joint forces of Khmelnytsky and Khan Islam Piray III. For 2 days, the battle was waged with alternate success. On the third day, a cannonball accidentally hit the Khan's suite. Frightened, the Khan ran away from the battlefield, followed by his army. Khmelnytsky tried to force the Khan to return, but was captured, leaving the army without its commander-in-chief. Colonel Ivan Bohun and his regiment defended their camp for 10 heroic days. They built a crossing across the marshes, but panic and commotion gripped the people, who were mostly peasants. They ran away in confusion, many being drowned or killed by their enemies. The defeat at Berestechko instigated an unquenchable desire for revenge on both sides. As Professor Natalia Yakovenko puts it, at that point, what had been civil war turned into a Polish-Ukrainian war. The Berestechko defeat was revenged by a victory over Polish troops at Battle. But after a short while, the Tatars again betrayed the Cossacks. The situation reached deadlock, so Khmelnytsky was compelled to look for a stronger ally. Who would it be? Turkey or Russia? In 1954, the Soviet Union pompously celebrated the 300th anniversary of the Pereyaslav Rada, the unification of the Ukraine and Russia. The Pereyaslav myth about the realization of the eternal desire of the two fraternal peoples to unite, which allegedly dates back to the times of Kievan Rus, was first contrived in Tsarist Russia, later to be revived and elaborated upon by Soviet ideologists. Orthodoxy proved to be the decisive factor in the Ukraine preferring Russia to Turkey. However, almost immediately, a conflict broke out. Khmelnytsky demanded that the Russian ambassadors, on behalf of Tsar Alexei, should swear solemnly that the rights of the Cossacks would remain unchanged. The ambassadors became outraged. It is the lieges who swear loyalty to the Tsar in the Muscovite state, not the other way round. Some of the Cossack authorities felt displeased and resentful. They broke off negotiations, and heated argument ensued. A few most eminent commanders refused to sign the treaty. The original documents signed in Pereyaslav were lost. Some historians believe that the treaty created a union with the autonomy of the Cossack state fully preserved, whilst others maintain that it was merely a provisional military alliance. After the joint Russian-Cossack campaign against Poland, the Cossack delegation was not admitted to the peace talks. Khmelnytsky found new allies in the form of Sweden and Brandenburg. Although Swedish troops had seized almost all Poland's territory, the signing of peace with Russia, together with the military support of the Tatars and the Austrians, helped her defeat the Swedes. The ineffective attack of the Cossack and Semigorod troops on Poland upset Khmelnytsky's major plans. The division of Poland was yet to follow. With his health seriously undermined by disease and wounds, Hetman Khmelnytsky died in 1657. Acclaimed by some, blasphemed by others, he became a symbol of freedom for the Ukraine, without which no nation can arise. A monument to Bogdan Khmelnytsky was erected by Tsar Alexander III, who had his own reasons for doing so. What Poland had lost Russia had gained. Poland had got used to winning victories in many wars as a result of Cossack support, but it was Russia that took advantage of the situation, which resulted in the partition of Poland. The Ukraine became Russia's gateway to Europe. The Cossacks helped Russia to defeat Sweden. As a result of Cossack support, Russia succeeded in defeating Turkey, eliminating the Crimean Khanate and penetrating as far as the Black Sea coast. In short, if it had not been for the Ukraine, Russia would never have become an empire. All the subsequent rulers of the Russian state have always been aware of this, but let's return to the chronology. Having realized the precise nature of the Cossacks' alliance with Moscow, Hetman Ivan Vysotsky made an attempt at returning to Poland in the capacity of an equal partner. It was hoped that a state of three nations would be founded: Poland, Lithuania and the Great Principality of Rus. Unfortunately, the rights of the would-be principality were so abridged by the Polish parliament that the treaty could not be accepted, not even by its most ardent advocates. Khmelnytsky's son Juras had little resemblance to his father, and chaos and confusion swept the country. Fratricidal wars ensued. Hetmans changed one after another, just like in a kaleidoscope. For some short time, Hetman Doroshenko managed to unite the Ukraine, but his death was followed by another chaotic period. This period is called in history the Ruin. Russia and Poland partitioned the Ukraine. Zaporizhia and Hetmanhood were placed under Moscow's jurisdiction. The figure of Mazepa attracted poets of the day: Byron, Hugo, Pushkin, Schiller and Słowatzki. They all wrote about him. Some of the poets were fascinated by his youthful adventures at the Polish royal court. Others were inspired by his struggle for independence. After he was elected hetman, he particularly dealt with all educational matters, as well as the restoration of churches, monasteries and palaces. Under his auspices, the Ukrainian Baroque flourished magnificently. Mazepa enjoyed the friendship and respect of Tsar Peter I, but he began to watch very closely the operations of the Northern War, and particularly the victories won by the Swedes. He regarded those victories as a chance to liberate the Ukraine. However, he acted surreptitiously when Charles XII unexpectedly arrived in Ukraine. So, instead of the 30,000 Cossacks that Mazepa had promised to give to Charles, he could only bring along a few thousand. Infuriated on hearing of this treachery, Peter I ordered Menshikov to assault the Cossack capital Baturin. All its population was massacred. Neither women nor children were spared. Baturin was razed to the ground. The bodies of the city's defenders were thrown into the river to deter further resistance. Tsar Peter ordered the immediate execution of every Zaporizhian Cossack on the spot. The armies met near Poltava. Charles XII evidently underrated the Tsar. The Russians put up resistance in redoubts, and their artillery inflicted heavy losses upon the attacking Swedes, who did not have any cannons worth mentioning. The drama of the battle was made all the more painful by the fact that 6 Cossack regiments were fighting on the side of the Tsar. Peter I treated his Swedish captors with deference, but he ordered to cut the throat of each and every captive Cossack, whom he regarded as traitors. The Poltava defeat buried Ukraine's chances to obtain independence for over 200 years. Mazepa found refuge in Turkey, where he died shortly after. According to Tsar Peter's strict order, the Orthodox Church condemned Mazepa by anathematizing him for the duration of his lifetime. The anathema was withdrawn only after the fall of the Tsarist regime. Peter I carried out large-scale reprisals in Ukraine, drastically reducing the autonomy of the hetmanhood. Later hetmans who followed had no room for maneuver and became completely dependent on Russia. Tsar Peter's daughter, Elizabeth, fell in love and secretly married a handsome Cossack who had a beautiful singing voice. She made his brother Kirill Razumovsky hetman of the Ukraine. He took his title and position very seriously and tried to restore genuine autonomy to the Cossack lands. Catherine II deprived Razumovsky of his title and eliminated the hetmanhood. Such was the end of the Cossack state founded by Bogdan Khmelnytsky. Starting with the Khmelnytsky Wars, many who lived in the territories blazed by wars would run away to the east, to the unpopulated lands which were named later Slobodska Ukraine. Those people brought with them many Cossack customs and traditions. At the end of the 18th century, about 1 million people inhabited the Slobodska Ukraine. However, together with the elimination of the hetmanhood, Catherine II restricted the liberties of that territory and turned it into another province of the Russian Empire. Thousands of Cossacks participated in the victorious wars between Russia and Turkey. When the days of the Crimean Khanate were numbered, the Zaporozhian Cossacks became redundant, and their siege was doomed. After 223 years, the free community of the Cossacks, Zaporozhian Sich, ceased to exist. The last of the chieftains, Petro Kaniszewski, was exiled to the White Sea. He was the first, but by no means the last, son of the Ukraine to be exiled to Solovki. The place would acquire an ominous notoriety under the Soviet regime.